Rich Dad, Poor Dad is probably the worst book I've ever read on personal finance or anything really. I don't understand how this book can still be in any bestseller list, how anyone can review this book without making fun of it, or how anyone can even recommend this abomination of a book. It is poorly written by a scammer, full of made-up stories with horrendous and at times illegal advice. I read the book, extracted and tested what it has to offer to show you how little you actually gain from reading this book. The book has a pretty basic but promising setup. I had two fathers, a rich one and a poor one. One was highly educated and intelligent. The other father never finished the 8th grade. Both earned substantial incomes, yet one struggled financially all his life. The other would become one of the richest men in Hawaii. He sets the book up as follow the lessons of Rich Dad and don't be like Poor Dad. Unfortunately, Rich Dad comes across as this incredible asshole in Robert's stories. My rich dad did not see Robin Hood as a hero. He called Robin Hood a crook. My rich dad spent his life doing his best to keep his companies from becoming unionized. Although the unions came close, Rich Dad was always able to fight them off. In his stories, Robert even describes how Rich Dad was hated by the community for how he runs his businesses. Poor Dad is Robert's actual father, for whom he shows so much disdain throughout the book for having a normie, non-rich lifestyle. When 9-year-old Robert asks his father why they aren't rich, Poor Dad answered, "Because I chose to be a school teacher. School teachers really don't think about being rich. We just like to teach." Poor Dad actually became the head of education for the state of Hawaii. While Robert constantly shits on Poor Dad for not being filthy rich, it sounds like he had a pretty meaningful and successful life. He even was incredibly supportive of his hateful child when he failed his first business at the age of 9. The most important thing is that you did something. Most people only talk and dream of getting rich. You've done something. I'm very proud of the two of you. How much more do you want in a father? Poor Dad thankfully passed away before the book was published, so he never had to read how little his son actually thought of him. The first lesson has this crazy story as the setup. Back in the 50s, 9-year-old Robert started learning from his rich dad. The method? Child labor. Robert had to work for 10 cents in Rich Dad's convenience stores. And after a few weeks, he got rightfully pissed and confronted his rich dad, who then shared his lesson. Don't get angry at the boss for exploiting you, get angry at life. Poor people quit or accept the shitty pay. Poor people work for money, but rich people have the money work for them. How was that the lesson from unpaid work in convenience stores? What's the point of the story? The first chapters are full of conversations like that, where Rich Dad says the wildest shit to a 9-year-old child and the lessons aren't really clear. He actually ends the chapter with a conversation where Rich Dad tells two 9-year-old children how leaving the gold standard is gonna ruin America. Lesson 2 is actual good advice. It's horribly packaged, but it's good advice. Get financial education to understand how money works, especially to understand the difference between an asset and a liability. Because the only real advice he has in this entire book and repackages in every chapter over and over again is buy assets, not liabilities. If you're not sure what exactly an asset or a liability is, don't worry, neither does Robert Kiyosaki. He says common definitions aren't good, so don't bother with them. Assets bring you money and liabilities cost money. And despite writing a lot of words, he never really gets around to help us understand to differentiate between an asset and a liability. Which is important because he himself says that buying a house, for example, could be an asset or a liability depending on the deal you get. But the entire chapter offers no real tangible advice and he just directs you to learn more and get financially educated. The third lesson he calls mind your own business. So he spends an entire chapter explaining how you should own a business instead of working as an employee in the rat race. But since a business is an asset, isn't that buying assets all over again? Then he dedicates an entire chapter where he misunderstands and hates taxes and just rambles nonsense. At one time, Americans were anti-tax. It had been the excessive tax on tea that led to the famous Tea Party in Boston Harbor, an incident that helped ignite the Revolutionary War. But it wasn't just the excessive tax, it was taxation without representation. That's like the whole slogan of the thing. Jesus Christ, Robert. In the middle of the book, he basically abandons the Rich Dad, Poor Dad narrative, and the second half is just him giving very generic, repetitive, regurgitated mindset financial advice. After reading this masterpiece, I needed to know how much of it was bullshit and how much useful advice was actually in this book. At this point, I would experiment and try the lessons from the book myself to properly review them. But what's to review? There's no advice I can actually work with. Buy an asset? I still need to learn what an asset is. Robert hasn't explained it. So educate myself? Sure, but that will probably take years and way better books than this one. Avoid paying taxes? I'd rather not commit tax fraud. There's just no actionable advice in this fucking book. I looked up what scientists and journalists researching his claims, his stories, and his person have to say about him. And holy shit, it's juicy. Many people have looked into Robert's stories, and as expected, it looks like most of them are completely fabricated. His real estate success numbers he shares in the book are insanely good, but he always brushes us off in interviews as just examples, so he never offered any proof or evidence for his financial success, which makes a lot of people think that his only success is selling get-rich-quick seminars and this book. There's also no real evidence that Rich Dad ever existed. In interviews, Robert posits the idea that Rich Dad is more like Harry Potter, a storytelling device, which in general I think would be fine, but there's a line between embellishing a story to make a valid point and just making shit up. Some of the tips Robert Kiyosaki gives in Rich Dad Poor Dad are just straight up illegal advice. At one point he suggests trading stocks based on private tips from friends and corporations. That's insider trading. Or writing contracts with clauses like subject to the approval of my business partner, but his business partner is his cat, which is fucking genius if it wasn't fraudulent. And of course Robert has great advice on how to defeat his nemesis, the tax man. By owning your own corporation, vacations are board meetings in Hawaii, car payments, insurance, repairs are company expenses. Health club membership is a company expense. Most restaurant meals are partial expenses. And that's tax fraud. Thankfully, one of its great lessons are to be financially educated, and that includes the law, the awareness of accounting, corporate, state, and national rules and regulations. I recommend playing within the rules. He just went no homo on his own advice. He said, oh, this isn't financial advice, in his book about personal finance. Obviously, that absolves him of all responsibility, but thankfully he tells us where we can find the necessary skills to become rich. Something to hold on to. Often I recommend joining a network marketing company, also called multi-level marketing, if they want to learn sales skills. So what do? I go to seminars. I go to at least 2 such courses every year. Robert totally drank the Kool-Aid and became a grifter himself, because of course he gives finance seminars too. And of course he misunderstands the stock market too. Smart investors don't time markets. If they miss a wave, they search for the next one and get themselves in position. But that's exactly what timing the market is. I told him that his profit is made when you buy, not when you sell. What? No, that's the opposite of how it works. A lot of Rich Dad Poor Dad is just standard grifter bullshit. All you need is information and the right mindset to be rich. School is not that important for financial success. You'll learn more from me. Think like an entrepreneur and you'll be rich. And my favorite grindset quote from this book: when I occasionally come up short, I still pay myself first. I let the creditors and even the government scream. I like it when they get tough. Why? Because those guys do me a favor. They inspire me to go out and create more money. Rich Dad Poor Dad has the craziest writing, where it's clear that Robert Kiyosaki was just rambling. But then I found out that Rich Dad Poor Dad was originally self-published and there wasn't much of an editing process, which explains some of those very funny paragraphs. I remember in school being told the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. My school teacher thought it was a wonderful story of a romantic hero, a Kevin Costner type. What? I don't understand. How do you... What? He was played by Kevin Costner. What is a Kevin Costner type? That is why all too often a person who comes into a sudden windfall of cash soon returns to the same financial mess. Thus the saying, a fool and his money is one big party. Never change, Robert. Never change. Hidden in the made-up stories and the grindset bullshit advice are some actual useful learnings. Buy assets, not liabilities. You have to figure out on your own if an opportunity is more of an asset or a liability, But in essence, it's a great way to look at your financial decisions. And to become better at assessing opportunities, get financially educated. Absolutely. And if anything, Rich Dad Poor Dad makes you think about your finances and financial situation. It pushes you on the path where you want to learn more. To some extent, it is quite motivating to read Robert's stories, even if they are made up. While Rich Dad Poor Dad is an easy intro into the world of personal finance, it is so full of made-up stories, lies, horrible advice, scammy suggestions that I'd recommend you pick up any other book on personal finance. It doesn't matter which one, it will definitely be better than this. And there's still so much crazy shit I had to leave out, like Robert owning a patent for a board game, or him getting sued by his co-author, or him getting sued by his seminar attendees, or the contradiction between buying assets, not liabilities, and him really showing off owning a Porsche and expensive watches, and of course, him writing a book with Donald Trump. While reading and researching Rich Dad Poor Dad, I figured out how it ever became so successful and can still be on bestseller lists. First, he sold it to his multi-level marketing colleagues. Kinda gotta give him props for scamming his scammer buddies. At some point, he was on Oprah, which kind of validated his whole thing and propelled his book sales. With Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki sold us fiction as non-fiction. Half the book is just made up stories with no tangible lesson. It's a fun read that doesn't require any mental effort. It doesn't teach you anything complicated like law or bookkeeping or financial literacy. You don't have to create a budget, you don't have to learn how to analyze stocks or run the math on a real estate deal. All you have to do is change your mindset, do a few things off screen and become rich. It's the lie we all want to believe, and he successfully sold it to us.